as we get started. So a few announcements. If you have not been here before, we do have a Facebook group that you can use to connect with other attendees or people working on WordPress accessibility between meetups. You can find that if you just search WordPress accessibility on Facebook, or it is facebook.com/groups/WordPress.accessibility. You can answer questions, ask questions, share things you're working on, get feedback. It's a great supportive community, and there's a lot of people in there that provide helpful information. So I highly recommend joining. If you want to find the recording for this event, we always get asked, and we probably will get asked about halfway through, is this being recorded? The answer is yes. We post recordings about 1 to 2 weeks after the event is over, once we get corrected captions for the event. And those can be found if you go to equalizedigital.com/meetup. You can find all of the past recordings there. The other way to get notified about recordings is to join our email list, Focus State. We send out both announcements when events are coming up and reminders usually the day before an event. And then we have a bi-weekly newsletter that we send that includes links to all of the recordings, links to upcoming events, and links to other accessibility news from around the web. And you can join that by going to equalizedigital.com/focus-state. We also are releasing recordings in audio format now because people have been asking that. So if you go to our podcast website, which is accessibilitycraft.com, you can listen to past meetups just in audio format. Other announcements, we are always seeking more sponsors for the meetup. Unfortunately, the WordPress Foundation has told us they don't have funds to cover the cost of captioning or things like signers, and they've said, go find sponsors. So if anyone is ever interested in helping to support the meetup, please reach out to us. We would greatly appreciate it. You can get more information on that meetup website that I talked about earlier. It's the same thing where the recordings are. Or if you just email us, meetup@equalizedigital.com, that goes to myself and Paula, and we can get you information as well. You can also use that email address if you have any feedback for us, if you're interested in speaking, or if you have any topics that you want us to go find a speaker for. So maybe you're not the speaker on a topic, but you really want to learn about it. You can also message us there and we'll see what we can do. So I've been talking a lot about us. If you haven't been before, my name is Amber Hines. I'm the CEO of Equalize Digital. We're the lead organizers for the meetup. We are a certified B Corp that specializes in WordPress accessibility, and we have a plugin called Accessibility Checker. There's a free version of it on WordPress.org that helps you find some accessibility problems so that you can fix them on your website. We have a sponsor that I would like to thank today, IvyCat. IvyCat helps clients and agencies create, market, and maintain high-performing WordPress websites and web apps that are fast, easy to use, accessible, and get results. They have care plans, search engine optimization, and accessibility services to help clients grow and succeed without the stress and headaches of doing it alone. We greatly appreciate that IvyCat is sponsoring the live captions for today's events. They've been a past sponsor and will continue to sponsor some upcoming events. And so thank you. Huge shout out to Eric and IvyCat. We highly recommend learning more about them or just tweeting a thank you to them to help encourage them to continue sponsoring. So if you want to find IvyCat on the web, their website is ivycat.com. Or on, I still have a Twitter icon because I'm in denial, everyone. I'm not calling it X. At some point in time, I'll have to change that and start calling it X, but I am not. So on X, formerly known as Twitter, they are at IvyCatWeb. There are a couple of upcoming events that I want to tell you all about, and you can mark your calendars for. So our next meetup will be on Monday, September 18th at 7 p.m. US Central Time. Alex Stein does quarterly accessibility testing live for WordPress plugin developers, and he will be testing the Access Ally plugin, which is a like a membership plugin. So that should be very neat. Some people from their team will be on, and then he'll be on with me, and he'll be sharing his screen and using his screen reader to go through the plugin. So if you've never seen a screen reader demo, I highly recommend it. Even if you have, it's a great way to come and learn about what areas might trip people up. And usually you can take what you see on that plugin and put it on your own websites or your own products if you have them. And then WordPress Accessibility Day is September 27th through 28th. We are very, very excited about it this year. There's so many amazing talks. You can go to wpaccessibility.day. And actually now I'm thinking I should tell you the full URL to the subdomain. If you go to that one, you can then click over to the event website. The event website is 2023.wpaccessibility.day. Registration is free. You can donate and get a t-shirt if you want to do that, but you can also attend totally free. It's going to be 24 hours of talks. So no matter where you are in the world, there'll be something at a time that works for you, hopefully. And we're just encourage everyone to go and register for that event. And then the next two meetups in October will be Jen Harris will be talking about recipe for accessibility, limiting ingredients for faster design. This came as a request following the last meetup talk she gave, where people were asking for more information on how they can build websites that are accessible for smaller budget clients. So that's what this talk is about. And then Natalie McLeese on October 16th will be talking about doing accessibility audits on very large websites. So I am very excited to introduce our speakers. I'm going to add some spotlights to them to pop them up here for everyone. So you all should be able to see Bet Hannon and Meg Miller. Bet Hannon is the CEO of AccessiCart. She is also one of the lead organizers of WordPress Accessibility Day and does a lot with accessibility in the community. So you may have seen her around, whether on social media or in various groups, providing a lot of great expertise. And Meg Miller, of course, has spoken for us before and has given a great presentation on alt text that I have gotten so much positive feedback. So I'm really excited to have you, Meg, come and share your expertise on WooCommerce, because we've never had a WooCommerce talk before. So we're very excited. So I am going to stop sharing my screen and I will let you all take over. For everyone who's watching, if you can try to use the Q&A section, I will be watching that for questions. It's a little bit easier for me than if you put them in the chat. I will watch the chat too, but they will get answered faster with Q&A. Do you want us to wait till the end, Bet and Meg?
Yes, if you could, that would be great.
Okay.
So
we'll hold questions till the end, and then I'll pop in and we'll ask them.
All right. Yeah, we work together. So this is kind of the first time that we've also, either of us have done a talk kind of in tandem with another person somewhere. That took a little extra coordination. So thanks, Amber. So as we're starting out today, I know that we have some folks with us who are fairly new to accessibility. Maybe they have a WooCommerce shop, and this is kind of they're thinking about accessibility, but they're new to kind of our community and some of the things about accessibility. So I want to start with just a fairly short moment about why you would want to make your website accessible. And a lot of people come to accessibility concerns because they're worried about getting sued or fined. And indeed, in the first half of this year already, 84% of the ADA lawsuits around web accessibility in the US are e-commerce sites. So e-commerce is a place where there's often a lot of accessibility issues. There's also some new legislation coming into enforcement in the EU in June 2025, the European Accessibility Act. And it has some limited things, but basically, if you have a site that has EU customers, you'll want to start checking on that, because Like GDPR, it's not where your business is based, it's where your customers live. So thinking about accessibility and compliance with law is a huge deal for people, but there are a lot of other good reasons to begin thinking about accessibility for e-commerce shops. Globally, about 20 to 25% of all adults have some disability. And a lot of those disabilities are more invisible. But if people with disability, we want to make sure that, all of those folks that have disabilities are able to use the web. There's an equality piece here. But beyond that, people with disabilities, if they can't make a purchase on your website, you are leaving money on the table. A study in the UK estimates that 6.9 billion pounds, with a B, billion pounds, are being lost annually by inaccessible websites to their competitors that are accessible. So in addition to making your site accessible will almost always improve your SEO and always improve the user experience for all the visitors on your site. So lots of great reasons that you might want to make your site accessible. This talk, just for fair warning, will not be an introduction to accessibility. We will be giving some overviews, some strategies, some technical information about testing, and some or even a lot of what we're going to cover will be mostly helpful for developers. But if you're not a developer, please do hang in, because I do think you're going to have a lot of value in this talk, even if that's just a list of things you now need to be aware of and take up with the folks who help you with your site. If you're new to accessibility, here are some great resources to get you started. Amber mentioned some of them in the intro. The very first one in this list is this Meetup's past presentations. You can find a ton of great presentations there, recordings of past web presentations on a variety of topics. They'll help you learn a lot of what you need to know. And that Facebook group, like Amber mentioned, is a great place for asking questions. And then finally on this list is the Ally Collective, and it's an online resource where you can take self-paced learning courses. There are some other places too, but there are a lot of places around where you might want to start learning about accessibility. As we talk about various accessibility issues today, it's important to acknowledge that while all accessibility issues are important to address, they're not all equal in severity. Some accessibility issues are walls. That is, they prevent some people with disabilities from moving on to use the site at all. This would be a critical failure. And clearly, there's a high demand for getting those issues addressed. Some issues are hurdles. They're difficult, they create friction points. Some people with disabilities will have to go to great lengths to find a workaround if they stick around on your site at all. Hurdles would be considered severe or moderate issues. And other issues are more curbs. They represent a smaller point of stumble or friction. They make the site more annoying to use. That's not a great user experience. Curbs are considered minor issues. So walls, hurdles, and curbs. So in this presentation, we want to organize talking about various potential accessibility issues in e-commerce by thinking loosely about the buyer's journey. Before the potential customer even arrives at the site, there are some important things for the site owner to know about accessibility in WooCommerce core and themes. But accessibility is more than just about things in core and themes. We're going to talk about content accessibility. And then what's a WooCommerce site without some plugins? We'll talk about things to think about and to be aware of when you're choosing plugins or having custom coding done, which will help you know what to test for. And when you're, especially as we think about e-commerce functionalities that we would find on a WooCommerce site. Now, we did originally think about trying to, we did some auditing on a lot of different plugins, and we did originally think about just giving a list of good and bad plugins for accessibility, but we ended up feeling like it's a lot more valuable if we just try to help everyone be aware of those specific accessibility issues that are commonly found in e-commerce and specifically WooCommerce sites. So Meg's going to start us off with Woo and themes.
a few curbs, WooCommerce has done a good job progressing its front-end accessibility standards. WooCommerce tends to take accessibility concerns seriously, as evident in both their repo forums and GitHub communities. They regularly prioritize critical accessibility issues and take time for quality assurance. There are a couple curbs here and there. I'm not saying they're 100% accessible, but most users should be able to successfully browse and purchase items successfully using Woo Core alone. Most accessibility issues on Woo sites are a result of a theme, a plugin, or poor content practices, and we're going to go ahead and get started with themes. Shopping for a theme can be both nerve-wracking and exhilarating when trying to find one that reflects the vibe of your shop. But there are things to look out for to ensure it's functional in addition to simply looking nice. And fair warning, there is a difference between a theme being accessibility ready, as you would see a tag for in the repo, and actually being accessible. While there are definitely themes out there that are true blue accessibility themes by developers who understand the needs of users beyond aesthetics, this isn't always the case. At best, being accessibility ready means the heavy lifting is in place, but there are still optimizations that need to be made to make it accessible. This often means adjusting colors or increasing font sizes or those details. But other times, accessibility ready is just tacked onto a theme to encourage download when it doesn't even have base level accessibility optimizations, and we've certainly seen this before. Checking the accessibility of a WooCommerce theme isn't much different than checking the accessibility of any other site. But if it comes with additional features, special attention will want to be paid here. Since we already stated this won't be an intro to accessibility, we're only going to quickly review universal theme accessibility concerns. Font and interface colors should have adequate contrast to their backgrounds, which will vary depending on the size of the object. Typography itself is important for legibility. Avoid themes that force you into a cursive, handwritten, or decorative font. These are notoriously difficult to read, especially for those who may have a cognitive disability. Also, keep in mind, cursive hasn't been a required third-grade curriculum in the US since 2010, meaning anyone born after 2002 may be at a disadvantage. And that's 21 and younger for those of you who aren't keeping track. Themes should be able to zoom up to 200% without loss of content or functionality. And this is an official WCAG guideline, so part of the success criterion. Skip link presence should be tested for, and their functionality should be confirmed, especially if you're using a menu plugin or any sort of page builder. It's not uncommon for these to break the skip link IDs that they depend on to work. Clear user interface components and interactions. This means focus indication for keyboard users, clear hover effects that don't rely only on color, and obvious field focus indications. Sites should have a clear and logical reading order. This includes the tabbing order, which should be in the same order a user would visually read a site. And lastly, my favorite new enhancement of WCAG 2.2 is making clickable target size a AA requirement. Clickable targets like buttons and social icons should be a minimum of 24 pixels by 24 pixels. This ensures those with motor disabilities have enough room to successfully interact with these items. Personally, I prefer to keep them a little bit bigger at about 40 by 40, but that's just because I have chubby fingers and poor hand-eye coordination. So what makes a WooCommerce theme in particular special? So there are themes that have been optimized for WooCommerce, meaning a developer installed Woo on their dev environment and was sure to implement the theme styles to it. But then there are themes that were designed for WooCommerce, sometimes implementing special modals, features, or post types to optimize a shop. These features should be paid special attention. For example, a popular theme implements related product modals on each side of the screen on single product pages. Other themes entirely overhaul the product catalogs or add specially designed sliders or carousels. These features are potentially the biggest differences between a standard theme and a WooCommerce theme. And while I could do an entire presentation on why sliders should be avoided, we simply don't have the time to go into details on every single possible feature an e-commerce theme could possibly provide. And it's entirely possible to provide these custom features and still be totally accessible. But it all comes down to double checking. Regardless of what feature enticed you into a particular theme, it's necessary to do your due diligence and ensure you're not sacrificing function for form. So pay close attention to how the theme stands out from others and start testing those features. If you're not on the technical end of things, you'll probably need to download some browser extensions or use third-party tools. For a quick view of text information, I like the browser extension Fontanello. With Fontanello, you simply right-click on the text, navigate down to the Fontanello menu item, and an informative dropdown is available to you. As depicted in the screenshot on this slide, the dropdown will tell you a few things. One is the font size. While there's not an official minimum font standard, it's generally agreed upon that 16 pixels is a good minimum, especially for a standard body size. So if you have fonts on your theme that are less than that, you may want to consider bumping that up a bit. Additionally, Fontanello in particular shows you the contrast and the contrast between the foreground text and the background color, as well as its one of those days, as well as its accessible contrast pass or fail status. You can also check the color manually by copying the hex code from this dropdown. And from this particular dropdown, all you have to do is click on the hex code. You don't have to write it down. And pasting it into a tool like WebAIM's contrast checker. I love the extension Accessibility Insights, if only for their tab stop feature, which will visually show the order as you tab down a page. This is great for really getting a good idea of reading order. It also has an accessible names feature, which is great for discovering elements that aren't labeled properly or could be masquerading as UI components. Something that looks like a button but isn't one on a programmatic level. And we will go into depth about that a little bit later. This is a great tool for non-technical folks. At the very least, it will provide you with a list of things you're going to want to have your developer check out. And lastly, I cannot say this enough. Do not shy away from trying out a screen reader yourself. Well, you could download one, like I use NVDA. Windows, Apple OS, and iOS and Android all come with built-in screen readers. Turn that bad boy on and take it for a spin. You don't need to become a professional screen reader user to get comfortable turning one on for the purpose of testing. After all, there are plenty of users who require assistive technology who are still at a novice level, and those people should be kept in mind also. Being comfortable with a screen reader and personally knowing what your site sounds like to someone who may not be able to visually see it already puts you miles ahead of your competitors. Google your OS and how to turn on the screen reader and also how to turn it off. I encourage you to look up how to turn it off before you look up how to turn it on. Then just turn it on and listen. While there are many things that could create curves, hurdles, or walls for a user, these are a few jumping off points to consider when shopping for a theme. Be extra cautious if you're interested in a theme that relies on a framework. A framework is an expanded dependency infrastructure placed on top of WordPress. Common examples of a framework are Genesis, iThemes, and Underscores. Using a frame on top of your WordPress site can be extremely beneficial and add a ton of extra features. And a lot of them are actively optimizing themselves with accessibility in mind. However, developers who build themes meant for these frameworks are not always keeping those practices in mind and can critically impede some of these enhancements by simply being unaware of their existence or necessity. Avoid page builders if you can. I'm very vocal about this. While the WordPress block editor has some back-end editor accessibility issues, for the front end experience, laying page builders on top of it is redundant and just creates more potential points of weakness and conflicts. This is unnecessary considering you can pretty much do everything you'd need to within the native WordPress editor, especially considering the plethora of accessibility enhanced block library plugins available in the repo. Page builder themes and page builder frameworks tend to introduce many performance and accessibility issues. I'm not saying they're inaccessible by nature, but they're going to give you an extra unnecessary layer of required testing and troubleshooting when things go wrong. As Bet mentioned earlier, don't be afraid to reach out to communities about themes and recommendations. Accessibility communities love talking about accessibility, and most give the milk away for free because our goal is to ultimately make the web a more inclusive place. Selecting a theme should be about measuring twice and cutting once, and taking a few extra steps into consideration, even if a theme is advertised as accessibility ready, can save you and your users a lot of grief down the line. Anyone familiar with accessibility knows there's no such thing as one size fits all. So if a theme is trying to tell you it's the 100% accessibility cure-all, take extra cautions to ensure you're not buying snake oil. Back to Bet, who's going to talk to you about content accessibility.
So accessibility barriers are not just in the theme. I think that's sometimes a misconception that folks have, that it's all about the developer-focused things in the theme. It's important to remember website content accessibility basics must also be included in products. Anytime a product is edited, it can potentially create new accessibility issues. And again, if all of this is new to you, it'll be covered in much greater depth in the resources we mentioned at the beginning of the talk. But here's just a few reminders. Products should use nested heading tags as part of overall semantic HTML. The one and only one H1 on the product should be the product title, which should clearly describe the product. And everything after that should be properly nested semantic H tags. And using those H tags is really important because it helps screen reader users and assistive technology users find their way, navigate their way through the product page. Every page image should have alt text. In addition to basic good alt text practices like not keyword stuffing, product images require special care for alt text because you may want to include features that may be visible in the image but not necessarily listed in the content. This needs to get balanced out, however, with not making the alt text too verbose, too long, and too detailed, especially if it's trying to repeat content that's in the features list of the text. So we have several posts on the AccessiCart blog about this topic. And last year, Meg gave, I think this is the presentation that Amber referenced at the beginning, an entire presentation on this for this meetup just on product image alt text, which has some helpful exercises, some experiments you can do to level up your product text alt skills. You want to make sure that you're using good descriptive link text. People who are dependent on screen readers, and by the way, that's not just visually impaired people, that's sometimes people with cognitive disabilities also depend on screen readers. Those users often skip through the content and have the screen reader read out loud just some of the H tags and the link text. And if you think about it, that's what those of us who are sighted are doing as well. We're skimming through the content. And so it's really important that all of the text that you turn into a link could stand on its own outside the context of the rest of the text around it. So if someone were to simply read out loud the text of your link, they would know where they're going to go and what that link was going to do. So you wouldn't want to have click here, click here, click here be the thing that the screen reader reads out. All videos need to have captions or transcripts. There are some great tools out there that will let you do this automatically and even for free. But if you're using auto captioning on those videos as you're uploading them, you absolutely have to check them for accuracy, especially if those videos are using any specialized or technical language. Having captions or transcripts that clearly have not been proofread may convey to your user that you don't really care about their experience on the site. And incorrect captions can negatively impact your SEO as well. Sometimes people are in the habit of creating what visually might appear to be a list, but really isn't a list in the HTML. Like you might do that with tabs or with hyphens. And this is a big problem because then the code doesn't tell the screen reader user that the content is in a list or table, making that content potentially difficult to understand. So you always want to use actual bulleted or numbered lists, actual columns, actual tables that are a part of your web page so that screen reader users will have the proper context for understanding that content. And finally, I don't have a slide for this, but use plain language, especially when you're using calls for action. Being cute and making a button that says, what appears to be a button, say, let's do this, can be confusing versus a much more direct buy now. So once you've made sure that your theme and your products are accessible, it's time to turn to plugins and custom code.
We may not have a slide for it, but I could probably do an entire presentation on cute language and how often it's seen and how annoying it is. So as we indicated earlier, the good news is that WooCommerce out of the box is fairly accessible. Most major accessibility issues for WooCommerce come from plugins or custom coding. And that means when we are focused on front-end accessibility, any plugin or custom coding that affects the front-end output needs to be evaluated. This would include things like making changes to the product search, the add to cart functionality, making changes to the checkout process, and much more. Here's a tip. Plugins and custom coding that work within the core Woo functionalities and components are much more likely to be accessible than plugins and custom coding that work around core WooCommerce to do their own thing, or what I like to call going rogue. We aren't saying that it's impossible to be accessible if plugins or code are creating new functionalities and components. Just that if a developer isn't using best practice code, there's a good chance it won't be. Almost all WooCommerce stores need some add-ons or plugins. However, they can also make a store entirely unusable for some users. A lot of plugins can come with the same issues we discussed regarding themes. They can introduce poor color contrast or a lack of keyboard access or focus indication. You can test them using the same methods. However, we'll be talking a lot about code here, as a lot of plugin accessibility issues stem from bad development practices. Unfortunately, a lot of these issues can be difficult to diagnose if you aren't sure what you're looking for or aren't familiar with a browser inspector. So some people may need the assistance of a developer to avoid misdiagnosing issues. I encourage users to pay attention to both the support and review forums of plugins they're considering. It's not uncommon for folks to report accessibility issues there. If a plugin author responds to a user, you can also get a read on their commitment. And unfortunately, it's still not uncommon for some plugin authors to disclose accessibility simply isn't a priority for them. While we'll touch on some testing methods here, the primary goal of this section is education and making you aware of some of the accessibility issues lurking in the repo and practices being utilized by popular plugins that could be on your store right now. As I mentioned, we will be going through quite a bit of code talk here. But even if you're not on the technical end of things, this should give you some good ideas of the kinds of questions you should be asking your developer. On this slide, we have some code here. In the left column, we have an A tag wrapped with link text that says, take me somewhere. And in the right column, we have a button, and the text for that is activate something. Let me define some of what I mean by worst practices in development. Many things in web development can be done multiple ways. However, there are a few elements that have specific programmatic purposes and should be used for specific things. Best practice coding means a developer is using an element as it was designed to be used, while bad or worst practice means a developer is usually misusing an element that already has a specific purpose or forcing one element to act like a different one, which is often redundant because, as we said, there is probably an existing element that fills that need. As a quick example, we'll use links and buttons. And when I say that, I mean A tags and button tags, not how they look visually. They could look identical visually on the front end. It's not uncommon for some developers to use these interchangeably, and this is bad practice. A tags are intended to take you somewhere, like another page off the site or somewhere else on the same page. However, a button tag is meant to activate something, like a modal. These semantics are very important when it comes to accessibility. When elements aren't used correctly, assistive technology doesn't relay their information properly, and it can keep some people from accessing certain aspects of a site altogether. Worst practice coding standards are like using a baseball bat to hammer in a nail when there is an actual hammer within reach. This distinction is important because best practice code will almost always be accessible, and bad or worst practice code will almost always cause accessibility curbs, hurdles, or walls, and in most cases, negatively impact your SEO. Let's consider some real-life examples. Gift card plugins, they're very popular and for good reason. Who doesn't love a good gift card? What's important when picking out a gift card? And I'd imagine the amount of the card is the top priority. WooCommerce uses input components for their products, things like selectors, radio buttons, and checkboxes. This method is very efficient when accessibility is kept in mind and everything is labeled correctly. For example, if the amount selection is using an input group with a semantic label titled select the amount with amount options like $25, $50, and $75 using radio buttons, a low vision screen reader user should be able to successfully navigate and select from these options via keyboard and have context for this field. This is a great method. You can even style these radio buttons to look like buttons. However, without keeping accessibility in mind, what if we put select the amount in paragraph tags and use semantic buttons for the amounts instead? This can be a problem. For one, the buttons aren't tied to the fake paragraph label at a programmatic level. This means they will show up out of context on an element list. A screen reader user would hear the amounts, but not the label. Well, you could assume a user purchasing a gift card would conclude they're selecting an amount for the gift card. The fact that these are buttons misinforms the user as to their functionality. As we mentioned, buttons are used to trigger something, so a screen reader user wouldn't have a clear idea of what selecting this option would do. Additionally, even if a developer programs a button group to only allow one option, the way a radio button group works, this information isn't conveyed to a screen reader user. So they aren't being told that selecting one option will unselect another. When a user can't visually see what is occurring on the screen, this could prove to be a confusing and counterintuitive experience. And we'll discuss the importance of semantic labels a little bit later. So what else is important when selecting a gift card? What about the face? What it looks like? Let's say a gift card has 3 face options: happy birthday, congratulations, and happy holidays. All very different. And ideally, you'd get to pick which one you could use, right? But this is another field that could be accessible using input fields such as a radio button group with images, with proper alt text. But again, ignoring accessibility, what if we wrap the image options in div tags and use JavaScript to make them act like radio buttons? While this reinvention of the wheel may not be a problem for mouse users, this method makes selecting a card face impossible for any keyboard user, especially without the right attributes. Divs are not user interface objects, which means they can't be tabbed to and do not show up as interactable in a screen reader element list. They are entirely unselectable by a keyboard user, cited or not. These are examples of bad practice coding that can go unnoticed simply because they appear to work for an able-bodied user. Just like people, it's how the inside was developed that counts. And unfortunately, these practices are actively being used by a few gift card plugins available in the WordPress repo right now. A large variety of WooCommerce plugins involve adding, removing, or modifying user components. As implied, user interface or UI components are elements intended for user interaction. They are defined by 4 major categories: input controls, navigational components, information components, and containers. We will go into some specifics later on, but we're going to touch on the broad spectrum and how it applies to WooCommerce plugins. UI components must be usable. They are the backbone of any website. And unfortunately, plugins often create UI components that are either inaccessible by keyboard, wreak havoc on an otherwise clean interface, break core WooCommerce components that were otherwise fine, or just generally create a poor user experience. For example, one of the issues I see relatively often are plugins that alter the display of product variations. By default, WooCommerce uses a drop-down selector for product variations, but it's not uncommon for shop owners to want something a little snazzier, such as thumbnails or color swatches. There are some plugins that it can accomplish this accessibly by using input controls. There's plenty of them, just like Woo does. However, others, as we previously discussed, go rogue and use div tags, which are not UI components, and JavaScript to make them act like selectable options. Just like with our gift cards example, this means keyboard users can't select any variables. Whatever the default settings are will be the only variation of a product they would be able to buy without the use of a mouse. I see the same issue a lot with some coupon plugins. A lot of coupon plugins use the same method of non-UI components in JavaScript that allow users to get a discount when shopping. Well, at least mouse users. Keyboard users aren't allowed to get 20% off a pair of khakis, apparently. Do you see why bad practice coding can be a problem? And in this particular case, maybe even a legal issue? Using the Accessibility Insights browser extension I mentioned earlier, by enabling accessible names, it will highlight elements on the screen and how they're programmatically identified, meaning how a screen reader sees them. And if an element is missing a name, it doesn't take a developer to know it's a good indication that inaccessible shenanigans are afoot. Any UI component implemented by a plugin should be checked, maybe double checked for bad practice code. As an asterisk, it is possible to make these more accessible with the use of attributes and extra layers of code. But that's not what's happening here. That's not what I'm referring to. And there are so many elements in existence to accomplish these tasks natively that there aren't many good reasons to force non-UI components like a div to be something it's not, especially at the expense of user experience. So just like my meme on screen here says, stop trying to make div plus JavaScript happen. Whether it's a share on social media button, quick views, variable alterations, coupons, or whatever awesome feature you want to add to your website, it's crucial to ensure these are usable by everyone. Other popular additions to WooCommerce stores are filtering and sorting plugins. Especially if you have a large inventory and a huge variety of products, adding optimized filtering and sorting plugins can greatly enhance a user's experience, make it easier to find the products they're looking for more quickly. However, a lot of these plugins use methods that don't always make the experience enjoyable for users of assistive technology. For example, you've probably been on a website before with a filter that refreshes the results on the same page. If it isn't announced to a screen reader user, the results update automatically, they may not be aware something is happening. This can be extremely aggravating and forces them to bounce around to find out if their action did anything at all on a page. And I do want to take a moment to clear up a common misconception about users of assistive technology and this helpless, lost, and confused trope. While yes, inaccessible websites can be an extremely confusing experience, when we use the word confusing, people less familiar with accessibility often associate this description with a scared child lost in a department store, which is an inaccurate stigma by how we think of people with disabilities on a broad scale. The feeling it invokes is something we can all relate to, and that's being extremely frustrated by a shopping experience. When a store has counterintuitive organization, making it difficult to find what you're looking for without assistance. It's the equivalent of not labeling aisles, realizing an item was stocked in a place you would never look for it, or not being able to access an aisle at all because an inconsiderate employee left a trolley or a pallet in front of it. These are all common and aggravating occurrences I imagine most of us have had to deal with, and that users of assistive technology have to deal with digitally every day due to common inaccessible practices. You'll definitely want to make sure your sorting and refreshes are keyboard accessible. You should be able to test most of these using the tab, enter, and arrow keys. Make sure keyboards have access to the same dropdowns and filter options mouse users do. If you're using an advanced search plugin that automatically provides search results, make sure you test that those are keyboard accessible. I highly encourage you to activate your operating system screen reader while tabbing through these options. For an enlightening experience, try running some tests with your eyes closed. For example, if you have an advanced search plugin installed that automatically populates with recommended products, turn on your screen reader, click on the search box, and close your eyes and start typing a product you know is in your store. It's the screen reader telling you what's happening. Do you think someone who is blind or low vision would be aware of the automatically populating products? You can do a similar experiment with automatically updating filters. Highlight a filter selection box and use your arrow keys slowly, enough time in between for items to refresh on the page, and listen during your reader to any what is happening on the page. Even if you're not adept at using a screen reader or keyboard navigation, these little experiments can give you enough information to know whether or not someone who requires assistive technology would have a good user experience with these features. As long as someone could ultimately use these functions, these would be hurdles or even curbs. But one of the goals of accessibility is to allow everyone to have the same experience and access to the same features on a site. So ideally, these features would be easily usable with little frustration to users who may have a disability, as they would be for an able-bodied mouse user. You want to ensure the experience is as universal and predictable as possible. So we've got some more code on this page. We have 2 examples for good practice labeling, semantic labeling. And that is a label tied to an input by a foreign ID with the proper attributes. The label itself is good for accessibility. And another one using a label wrap method where the label tags wrap around the input. No's are just a label with no attributes connecting it to the input. And the other no option is no label, semantic label at all, but using P tags around the label, which is labeled bad for accessibility, parentheses, fake label. We've touched on semantic labels a few times. Let's go into why that is so important. If a label isn't programmatically associated with a field, it significantly limits the ability of visually impaired screen reader users to successfully fill out a form with confidence. To a screen reader user, an input field without a semantic label is a blank box. This requires them to jump around to locate nearby information, and this leaves room for error, especially for more complex forms. Input fields without label are the equivalent of being handed a bunch of spices and ingredients without their own labels, and then being expected to use them correctly. Keeping your fingers crossed, you do not mix up the salt and sugar. If you're adding any sort of field manager plugin, make sure you check on their output. If the plugin developers have followed Woo standards, then these fields should be very accessible. However, there are a couple things that can make them inaccessible. Form labels should be visible at all times. So if a developer has opted to hide them visually, maybe replacing them with a placeholder content inside the input box that is going to go away once the field is filled out, they could cause issues for those with cognitive disabilities once the placeholders disappear. And if they use a display none method, this could make forms unusable for screen reader users. This is also something you should keep an eye on when selecting a theme, as a theme developer could hard code hidden form fields. To reiterate, you'll want to make sure the form fields are real labels that are programmatically associated with the field it's labeling. An easy method to ensure a form's labels are correctly connected to a field. Simply click on the label. Its associated fields should become active automatically. If you click on a form field label and it does not become active, this is a pretty good indication of fake labels that could make it impossible for a screen reader user to fill out the form in question efficiently, if at all. And here is that test and practice, just so you know what to look for. As you can see, I'm clicking on the label here and the field becomes highlighted. There's a visual focus indicator. But when I click on the inaccessible field, nothing happens. It still has the capability of focus, but clicking on that field does nothing at all. From here, we're going to discuss some more general site elements. These elements are used so broadly and have so many possibilities of utilization, it's difficult to actually provide a specific list for every single one. So we're going to touch on them and give you an idea of what to look out for. If you add a plugin that creates any sort of table, like a wish list, cart overhaul, size chart, so on, there are a few things you want to keep an eye on. We're going to be, as you can see on the screenshot on this slide, we're going to be looking at how the core WooCart table functions to give you a baseline example. There's usually an X button to remove an item from the cart. And if you turn on Accessibility Insights, you'll see that this X button is later labeled Remove Item. And you want to make sure the tab, you'll want to tab to that button and press Enter to make sure it still functions as intended. If there are additional links on a table or modals, you'll want to check those, interact with them, and just generally make sure you can function, everything functions as it's supposed to be, like increasing the quantities using the up and down arrow keys. Secondly, you'll want to make sure a non-core table has semantic table headings. Without headings, a screen reader user won't hear what the column's information pertains to. If you're uncomfortable in the inspector, you can download an accessibility browser extension like Wave. While automatic checkers can't detect everything that could be inaccessible on a site, they can be great for semantic detection, and they'll at least tell you if your table is missing a header. Modals and pop-ups are extremely common on e-commerce websites to assist in efficient shopping and padding your newsletter recipient list. However, they are among the most common hurdles we see. The testing for both modals and pop-ups are pretty much the same. Ensure its content is accessible via keyboard and tab through it, ensuring you can interact with everything. Most importantly, you'll want to make sure it's dismissible. Ideally, a close button is visible and not hidden, which is a common practice in pop-ups. Even better is when it can be dismissed using the escape key on a keyboard. The other important part of this, is the presence of a pop-up or a modal should be announced to a screen reader using the correct attributes. Otherwise, they may not be aware of its existence at all. A developer can help confirm attributes, but the best way is to test this using an actual screen reader and ensure those attributes are being used correctly. Or alternatively, they aren't being interfered with by another site feature. Ideally, the screen reader will announce the presence of a dialog box and have a label programmatically associated with it explaining its purpose, like newsletter sign up or product quick view. The best way to test this would be to download the screen reader and ensure its presence is announced. To give you an idea of what to look out for, common uses of a pop-up as reference are used for newsletter signups and occur automatically when a user has been on the site or a page for a certain amount of time. If you plan on using one of these plugins, test it thoroughly. Modals are essentially user-triggered pop-ups. The most common example of a modal is a quick view, often seen on product listings that pop up with more detailed information without actually redirecting a user to another page. Modals can be the result of many plugins, from cart enhancement, coupons, and login themes. And there are many different ways to develop them. So you want to make sure any modal implemented by a plugin on your site is accessible. I find a lot of keyboard issues lie within cart modals. It's not uncommon to have a cart button that instead of taking you to another page, opens a quick view modal. These can be extremely problematic if not done correctly. I've seen some that don't allow keyboard access into them at all, especially if this is the only way to get to a physical cart or checkout page. Keyboard accessibility is a must, period. If your keyboard testing reveals any sort of struggles or hurdles, you may want to consider another option. So what makes a properly built plugin? There's no one right answer, but as we've discussed, there are certainly quite a few wrong ones. To reiterate, if you're adding onto an existing functionality, it's wise to follow core coding practices, especially if they tend to use best practice coding standards, as WooCommerce itself tends to follow. The add-on should function indistinguishably from the core so it integrates seamlessly. And best practice code is a must. There's no reason to be forcing elements into a job they didn't apply for, especially when they already have jobs to begin with. I know this has been a lot, and I'm sure there will be some questions in a bit. But for now, Bet has one more resource to share.
Thanks, Meg. As we're wrapping up, we just want to make sure that folks know that for US business owners, there's a tax credit available for making your website more accessible. The business has to be US based and has to have either under 30 employees or under $1 million in gross revenue. But things like the entire cost of a website project when accessibility is included, or any remediations or testing, auditing that are done can be included. It's a credit on of 50% up to $10,000. So up to $5,000 of credit. And that business has to pay that up front, and then they can get their taxes reduced the next year. And this is a tax credit that can be claimed repeatedly. So it can be a great resource in terms of helping folks make their sites more accessible overall. We have covered, Meg has covered a lot in this presentation, and we both know that you might feel overwhelmed and you might not know where to start, and that's normal. It happens to all of us. Just start small. You'll develop better habits and better practices for being more accessible over time. And after a while, all of this will become second nature. Progress over perfection is a saying within the accessibility community. And that's our advice to you. Just start making small progress, small steps, and stop worrying about being perfect. Just start. Thanks for listening. We do have the time to stay on if there are questions.
There are some, so thank you so much. That was a fabulous presentation. I'm maybe going to give you, I'm not going to give them quite in the order they came in, but I think, let's see, there was, well, I thought I saw it. Okay, yeah. So I think I'm going to start with maybe an easy one, but we'll see. Deneb is asking, how do you balance the need for descriptive alt text with the fact that product images are often used as links to the product? That would necessitate simply the name of the product. So like on an archive page, maybe the alt text needs to be different from on the product page. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that.
Go, Meg.
So there is in WordPress, there are multiple ways to implement product alt text. You can set a global alt text for an image from say the media library, but you can override that locally. So you will want to have that global set. If you're using it for images, you want to have that global set. But then when you're actually implementing the product images into the gallery or the single product images, you want to make sure to balance the description text with the alt text. And this can actually help you provide better information for all of your users by describing universal information that everybody will want in the actual product description, which a lot of people aren't doing because they depend on everything being visual, like even metal buttons versus plastic buttons on a shirt, you know? So you want to provide, it'll help you balance the difference of doing that universal description in your actual product description, while actually providing descriptions in the alt text of things that you will depend on people to be aware of visually, and describe that in a manner to people who may not be visually aware of the product. Is there a pocket on the shirt? You know, stuff like that. Stuff like that goes unnoticed. It's never mentioned in the description that there's a breast pocket on a shirt. It's not in the alt text. Somebody out there is not going to be aware that this pocket exists if they can't see it themselves. And that's the kind of stuff you want to balance. I know I went a little bit off topic in that. So
no, I think that's a good point. One of the things that I would push back a little bit on this question is it sort of presupposes that the name of the product should be the alt text when it's linked. And I don't actually think I agree on that, because if I think about when I go clothing shopping, half the time the clothes are like let's say we're looking at dresses. They're like named like the Sally dress, the Mary dress, or something like that, right? But I'm on an archive page as a sighted person, I can see, oh, this one is a long dress, this one is a short dress, this one is green, this one is blue. And then I could choose to go to that single to go like add it to cart or read more about it. But if I was on a screen reader and all I heard was link Sally dress, link Mary dress,
Yeah.
how would I know that one was blue and short and one was green and long? And then I even wanted to go to the product page. So I think even on an archive page, you don't actually want to use the name of the product. You want to describe it. Would you agree?
That's a fantastic point, especially if you have those kinds of the Sally dress, stuff like that. I think you would be safer if your titles were more innocuous, like, you know, this is my generic green army dress with a collared. The way Amazon labels their products, where they shove them in every you could possibly want. That's an example. The title alt text could be adequate in a catalog. But no, what Amber's saying is absolutely great, and these conversations are good ones to be happening, because by putting yourself in the position of a screen reader user, thinking what is going to be the most helpful. In some things, for example, if we're talking about clothes, that is a great example. If we're talking about tools, which are going to probably be titled what you're looking for, that may be an example of differences in alt text, where you say, you know, this is my 3-wrench set, you know, in the alt text for the title, but then go into more details in the single product page. It's just going to depend on what kind of shop you're running and what you yourself may be looking for and how you want to convey that to another person. And that's going to make the decision for you on whether or not what alt text you use in what places. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that totally does make sense. So this is definitely a curveball question, but Jason asked, how are accessibility experts and brands looking towards technologies like voice and conversational AI to help them optimize the user experience for all users? Have you all looked into this, or have you heard much about what like e-commerce is doing on this front?
Oh, do you know that the NVIDIA A100 or A1000 is going for like $40,000. These are this is, oh, I have a whole thing on this. I'm not going to get into it. I can't. But no, I think it's all fascinating. I'm coming in and out of it. I'm not the most well-versed on the accessibility specific enhancements that people are creating. I am wary about anything that is automatic, because as any of us know, automatic checkers and AI fail. However, it's getting smarter. I welcome our AI overlords. I cannot wait for this you know, future. But I encourage anybody to have a conversation with ChatGPT specifically about accessibility and talking through things. I think that this is
Megan's already trying to like change the AI stuff around accessibility by having conversations with chat.
It's such a broad topic. That's the thing, is such a broad topic. We can talk about small local things like ChatGPT, but there are big, huge things going on, and it's just
it's still really
it's such a broad topic. I would love, and I'm not well versed enough on all of it, but there are some really fascinating things going on there, and I would actually.
But somebody really tripped your geekometer on all of this. Right?
So like,
I saw a talk. I want to say it was at Access U like 2 or 3 years ago. It was like during COVID, I think, because it was all virtual. It was like when I watched. So it might be on a Knowbility website or a Knowbility YouTube channel if anyone wants to check that out. And Knowbility is KNOWBILITY. But one of the things they were saying is he was talking about like voice search and voice command and how that can help from an accessibility standpoint. And he was advising that brands should go out and get your, I don't remember what the actual term is.
Claim your, yes.
The like sound of your brand.
Yep.
So that when somebody's like, I want to get something from this company, the voice recognition like Siri or any of those other ones would know what your company was. It's like your audio handle, I guess. There's probably an actual term for this. Do you know
And
it?
the person who does that stuff and is really early on in all this in the WordPress community is Chip Edwards. So if people are
Okay.
interested in looking at that, find Chip Edwards, and he's been talking about that at WordCamps for like since at least 2020, if not before. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a whole another thing, which is, you know, it's hard not wanting to necessarily feed the corporate machine, but to some degree, perhaps having some of your products, if you're an e-commerce business on Amazon, might be helpful from an accessibility standpoint. Maybe you don't only sell on Amazon, like you still have your website, but if somebody has an Alexa, it might be easier for them to say, hey, Alexa, order me 3 of these. I don't know. I don't know if you all have thoughts on that.
Sometimes there are restrictions about the way you do that. Sometimes you can't do both.
To put it into, I think that AI is coming a long way in all of its facets, from these giant broad things to local small tools. It's coming a long way, but at the end of the day, at least right now, maybe this will be different in 5 or 10 years, maybe next year.
5 months.
But we can't take the human element out of it right now. You know, especially during this demo process, which is we're in AI future alpha right now. You know, so it is fascinating and awesome and can do some amazing things, especially for people who can't wrap their head around this. And as it fills in the gap, it could potentially make everything much more accessible. We're not there right now, and we cannot take the human aspect out of it. So it's just a broader scale of what I talk about with what a lot of us talk about with the cautions with automatic testing, where it can be so great. It can help point you in the right direction, but it can't detect everything. And people who don't know what they're looking at, and that can make an issue worse. So I think that we're kind of right there still with AI, but there's a future there, and
do you think in the future that there is a future at some point where the AI will be able to compensate enough for bad accessibility on a website that it won't have to be
you mean
fixed
like
at
an
the
overlay?
level? No, not like that, but that the AI would be able to would be able to help the person navigate through whatever they needed to do on the website, even if it wasn't coded well.
I think there's a possibility for that personally. But that
I think it's a long way off.
Yeah, exactly. That would be such a long way off. And I think that there are still people who don't want to sacrifice form for function. That is just a fact. Do you know how many times, and I use this line because this specific line bothers me so much. And when I was a fledgling accessibility professional, I didn't have the guts to stand up and about this, but people who don't want, who say accessibility doesn't fit into their elegant design is just, right now, I don't know, I'd have a lot to say to them face to face if they said the same thing to me right now. But like, yeah, there is a potential accessibility fill for AI in cases like that of people who don't want to sacrifice form for function. Yeah, and it's like oh, now I haven't had enough coffee today. It's just there are going to be places where AI can fill the gaps of people who are either still ignorant or are well aware accessibility is a necessity, but still refuse to because they don't want to sacrifice their elegance. And I think that there will be a time when AI is intelligent enough and human enough. I know that scares. My partner is a Luddite, so it terrifies him when I talk about this stuff. But I think there is a time when AI is human enough to actually fill in some of those needs. I do think it's a long way off. But at the end of the day, we're also still going to have a lot of people behind websites, and people can be just awful. So
Meg, this will
I think
this will appeal to you. Somebody in the chat said lipstick on a pig.
Yeah.
Well, I think if we're going to have more AI on that front, I would like to see, not that websites have to implement AI, which is what the overlays do, right?
Yeah.
But it would be neat to see if screen readers actually
Yes.
used AI to better incorporate. So for example, if a screen reader could start to recognize if there's a div with the word previous in it, I bet this is a button, right? Like, because what else would you have a div with previous or next in it, you know? And like maybe being able to get smarter about the junky code that it sees in the screen reader itself, rather
Yes.
than every website trying to have to implement AI to fix their junky code.
That's what I was trying to ask earlier, right? Is
Okay,
there a
yeah.
way for like the screen readers or even just OSs to get better at reading out things, right?
Okay, so
Yeah, it says
I
Craig
have a
says Freedom Scientific is experimenting with that right now. With
Mm.
the
okay,
screen reader.
so here's this is going to be a little bit of a journey. Okay, too many people use, we're going to go back to ChatGPT. Too many people use it to create code for them. That's bad, because ChatGPT can be a great asset for coding, but not if you don't know what you're already doing. So anybody who's trying to create their own functions probably shouldn't use it that way. However, what you can do with it, and it's just going to get better from here. What you can do with it is, if something is, okay, so a big joke in the coding community is the missing semicolon. The infamous missing semicolon. Where is it? It's breaking everything. Where is it? And so you can do things like grab a huge snippet of CSS, throw it in GPT and say, validate this, or find the missing semicolon, and it will do that for you. You can do that with small snippets of jQuery, verify, validate, and it can point stuff out to you. You can also ask it to enhance it for better coding practices and stuff like that. Again, do this with caution, because it's still learning. And if you don't already know what you're doing, you could make it worse. But I imagine things like that could come, and it will also provide you with the fixed version of it. So I imagine there is a possibility with AI and screen readers to actually automatically scan that page for poor practice code and almost fix it as it relays it back to the assistive technology user.
Well, that's
So
what Amber
because
was
that is
saying, right?
already working. Actively working, and once it gets integrated seamlessly into software and things are, you know, efficient, because this could be extremely heavy on hardware, you will be able to, I think that is entirely a possibility. That takes a lot.
So
That's going to
so
take a
then
lot smarter AI.
then the motivation for really making it accessible in its kind of originally accessible, as opposed to just letting that screen reader take care of it, is the performance for it.
Yeah, because it
Right.
would have a negative performance impact, I'm sure, just like any JavaScript overlay does. Okay, so I think this is an interesting sort of transition. Jason said that he's built a plugin that adds voice and speech recognition to WordPress and WooCommerce websites. So sort of like trying to do some of this stuff. Jason's done some work to make it keyboard accessible, but he doesn't know how to make it screen reader accessible. Do you have any tips for this?
Well, I mean, that's a little bit of a loaded question without seeing the functionality of it.
Right.
For example, how's the activation? You know, if screen readers will listen to stuff, like if a button is played, you know, you're playing a video and you can listen to it and can stay relatively silent during that time. So I'm not sure what to suggest to you without seeing all of it, but if you want to make it screen reader accessible, you need to make the controls accessible. Best practice is keeping the user in control, nothing automatically occurring without the user's consent. So if you have these controls, making the plugin voice activated for this website, then you want to make sure those controls can be activated by a keyboard for one. The buttons to activate it have the correct text that tells the screen reader what is going to happen. And then this is I'm very hesitant to give you detailed advice on this, just simply without seeing how things are working and what
how does it play
or
nice
testing it myself.
How does something voice that's doing something with voice then play or interact with the screen reader, right? Is it?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I
We
think the
have no idea
best
how to.
way is you need to make sure you test it within VDA and JAWS, because those are the two most commonly used on a computer, and then also VoiceOver. But if you only have a Mac computer and you only test with VoiceOver, you're not going to get what the
Right.
most common user experience is. So you definitely either need to set up like Bootcamp or Parallels or something like that, or get a PC so that you can test with in VDA. And then, or also I saw recently BrowserStack added
Yes.
something so you
They've
can
added a
test
new
with
thing
screen
recently.
readers in BrowserStack. I haven't played with it yet. Have you?
No, a little. We played with it. I played with it a little. The other thing that this person could do, it's a plugin, right? He could get in the queue, the growing queue of people for you and Alex to do
To
his,
test,
do a testing live. Like you
Yep.
gotta suck it up and be like brave and yeah.
I'd say the biggest things that come to mind for me with the voice control is, one, how are people even aware that the website can do that?
Yeah.
So potentially you need like ARIA live regions or some sort of alerts to notify someone that is a possibility if they can't see, or if they're, like if there's a banner message that shows it, like you were talking about pop-ups, Meg, but they're not announced to a screen reader,
Yeah.
then those people might not know. The other thing is I would test it with Dragon Speech, and I would probably find a user who uses Dragon Speech, which is a technology that helps them to do voice control. So someone who is maybe paraplegic or uses voice all the time.
Yeah.
And I would make sure that your program doesn't conflict with that.
Well, again, my question is, yeah, what's being read out loud by the accessibility tool, and then what is the voice, what's happening with voice on the site, right?
It also comes down to predictability. You want to make sure that anybody interacting with it, able-bodied, having a disability of any severity or on the range, you want to make sure that they know what's going to happen. So so when you create a predictable environment, a lot of things start coming into play from there. I cannot stress enough, stop assuming. Everybody when it comes to web development needs to stop assuming. They'll get it, they'll understand. Oh, you can do this. They'll figure it out. People are smart, they'll figure it out. That's not the discussion here. It's making a predictable experience and making sure users know what's going to happen when you click A. If you click A, what is B? And they need to know what B is going to be. Right. So when you start considering those aspects of it, a lot of things start a domino effect when it comes to code. Okay, I made sure I did this. Is this okay? And it starts leading you down a path that optimizes your code and creates a better experience for people. And you start seeking those questions out, the answers to the questions on your own. So I would definitely start with that mindset, because I think you might be surprised with how many realizations come of it by just doing your best to drop assumptions and making it the most predictable experience you possibly can.
Well, the other piece of this is we're still in early days of this, right? And so I think it's going to have to be that it develops a little bit, but then people who depend on screen readers or will have to tell us, do they want the screen reader to read things, or do they want this voice activated thing to read things to them? They will need to tell us what is going to be the better experience for them.
It looks like Jason posted a link in the chat if anyone feels like checking it out. Post Meetup, it's speak2web.com.
Yeah.
So there's a demo on there. So it might be interesting. And
Jason,
Jason, you
could
could also
veered
post
way
in the
away
Facebook
from
group.
WooCommerce.
yeah, a little off. I don't know if this was a follow-up question based on something you said. I'm going to be totally honest. I don't understand it, but maybe you do. So I'm going to ask it. Jean asked, would you please discuss the custom shortcode issue for accessibility? Do you know what that's referencing?
Oh, it's because I have a list of potential custom features. It's not what I apologize for not being clear. What I was trying to provide there is an example list of things that come with of common features that come with custom WooCommerce sites. And I apologize if I'm concluding the wrong thing and making an assumption. Shortcodes aren't natively inaccessible, especially because they describe something on the front end. But if a developer says, here are these custom shortcodes that are great. And then they have all the code that makes it function. If that code is not accessible and implementing these custom shortcodes output inaccessible content, that's where it becomes a problem. It's not inherently inaccessible as long as the code that it's outputting is accessible. So it's more of examples of features like to make you think about what's running on your theme. Like, oh, my theme came with these custom shopping shortcodes. That's where you start to check, because a lot of these, like I said earlier, a lot of these general themes, it's standard testing. But when they come with something special, something unique outside the box, that's where you start with your testing. And that's often a shortcode, slider, a carousel, or custom menus. Check your menus, people. They are literally how people get around your shop. And if they aren't accessible, people just get to, and don't get me started on a hamburger desktop menu. I just don't think we're there yet. But I think I have another webinar about that.
Meg has opinions.
I do.
Opinions are good. Opinions are good.
I just start with the implication was just to start with the custom feature that your WooCommerce theme comes with that makes it special, because there's a possibility that if it has accessibility issues, they're going to lie in those custom features. That developers are so wonderful and they have so many great ideas and they get excited and they're like, this is going to be great. This is going to make the experience so great. People who own shops are going to love it. And if those features are too outside the box, or well, not, there's no such thing as too outside the box, but if the coding is too outside the box and uses bad practice, then these features become your most critical downfall. So start with those features, because the developer was probably really excited about them and may or may not have used best practice.
So I'm going to put you both on the spot a little bit here, because you mentioned that you were originally thought you might just show up with, here's a list of good plugins and here's a list of bad plugins. And I have thoughts on this, but I'm curious, with what you've seen in WooCommerce, do you think the vast majority of them are actually just all on the bad list?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask us about specific ones, and we just agreed.
Well, okay, no, you can give us, if there is one that is really good, like I am like, shout it out. Like, that's awesome. I love to shout out plugins that are doing a good job, but I'm curious if, because in our experience with doing audits, I feel like almost all of them are not good or need at least some amount of remediation. Some are like, throw it away. Some are not that bad.
And before Meg replies on this, let me just sort of like offer a suggestion about how we can be better advocates. One is, we can be, as advocates, we can be pushing WooCommerce to do a better job about whether things are labeled accessible or not, and that WooCommerce ought to be, if they're selling the plugin on their site, WooCommerce ought to be making sure that that plugin at least has the option to fairly easily do output that is accessible. So there are ways that we can push at that a little bit on the Woo side too. Okay, Meg.
So I want to add a disclaimer here. We are not referring to backend editor functionality. That's a whole other can of worms, and I know a lot of us have opinions about it, but so we are disengaging with that part of the conversation altogether. Here's another opinion that I have.
Oh no.
For those of for whiskey drinkers out there, Jack Daniel's is swill that maybe once upon a time was good, but now they depend on their brand to get away with anything, to get away with this garbage. I think a lot of WooCommerce plugins do the same thing, where they got in there early in the game, and people only download them because they are recommended by word of mouth or by the downloads amount on a repo,
or their sponsorships of things.
And then they stop putting in the effort because they think people are going to just download it anyway. So I think a lot of especially the big popular plugins have a lot of issues on the front end. And it's more terrifying when you know how inaccessible they are, and you see 200,000 plus downloads, and you know they're out there like Predator, and it's I think the big names need to be held the most accountable, because if they are getting passed around word of mouth, they need to be the most, especially, I'm not kidding you guys, that coupon plugin, if you are only offering a coupon to people who use a mouse and excluding it and excluding any sort of discounts to somebody who's coming to the site by alternative methods, that's a discrimination issue. That is an active discrimination issue. And when people aren't making sure that their plugins are usable and then passing them off to other people, this is dangerous and awful. And
so do we think, I mean, I would be interested in, and maybe this is a question for another time, but is a good strategy in terms of being good advocates I mean, we've had issues. I mean, I saw recently, Amber, you posted fairly publicly on a plugin, not a WooCommerce plugin, but a different plugin, an accessibility issue in their support forum.
And then I tweeted about it, because that's how I get
she
people
tweeted
to
about
respond
it.
faster.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We had an issue with that same plugin that we repeatedly sent them the fixes for 18 months before and got crickets. Right? So are there ways that we should, do we think that's a good strategy? I mean, I don't want to shame people into doing stuff, but some of these people have been mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think social media can be really helpful on that front. I will say on the coupon pop-ups, if you need to do pop-ups on your website, don't pick a WooCommerce specific one. Pop-up Maker does a really good job with their accessibility.
Yeah.
It's not a WooCommerce specific plugin, but you can use it on your WooCommerce site. Is it 100% perfect? No, but it is really, really close. Like we use it without qualms on websites all the time.
So back to the question, Meg, do you have like one WooCommerce plugin that you thought was good?
I think I did quite a bit of testing, because, okay, so when you're doing an audit, you are experiencing a live environment of a variety of plugins stacked on top of each other doing different things. But for the sake of and oh my goodness, as Amber I'm sure could verify, loads and loads of accessibility issues on WooCommerce being caused by these plugins. And you get a good idea, because if you look at the code, you start recognizing the classes that are often associated. So you get an idea of what's going on here. But when I was specifically testing these, what I wanted to do was actually get an idea. So I had WooCommerce installed and no other plugins except for the one I have my dev environment with WooCommerce and like 80 plugins deactivated on it. But probably not that many, probably like 30. I don't know, a lot of them. I would say the safest ones, and this is not a grand association, because once I say this, there's going to be one out there that tricks somebody. But most of the field manager plugins have done a good job on front end accessibility. When I mentioned seamless integration into this, and when I say that, I mean, I personally, if you are creating an add-on for an existing functionality, that add-on should seem like it's practically a part of core. And by making those fields act the same as the WooCommerce does, by making sure those fields are tied and creating that experience, I would say that a lot of the big field manager plugins are relatively safe for front end accessibility. I don't like to endorse specific plugins, honestly. Maybe it's that feeling of once you make a claim.
We had an experience of kind of endorsing a plugin because we really like their accessibility, and then the next iteration came out and they totally undid a lot of their accessibility.
See, that's the thing. It's once I tell you it's good, they're going to blow it up.
But we can say this point in time, I want to say something like you were saying about feeling like it extends. So Yikes has a plugin that allows you to create custom tabs, and it just hooks into what WooCommerce does, and it doesn't do anything different. And so like, that's an example. I don't remember what that plugin is called, but if you search like Yikes custom WooCommerce tabs or something like that, it'll come up. It's a free plugin. And that's one that I haven't noticed it ever causing any accessibility problems. And that's a very useful thing that a lot of WooCommerce sites might want, custom tabs in their section. And because it relies on what WooCommerce is doing, it adopts that. I also saw in the chat that Angela said like shipping tax basic functionality plugins in her experience are usually okay. She says any plugin that does quote fancy stuff that changes the display of the archives or product pages, cart, checkout, is more what she tends to be more
That's
wary of.
Okay, so here's the thing, is the more you want it, the less effort they have to put into it. That is the key thinking about. If it's quote unquote boring functionality, like managing plugins or just little tiny features, in all likelihood, these have been effectively created. It's a weird dynamic. But the more you want something, the less effort they have to put into it. It's no different than lowering the quality of a pair of jeans that's flying off the shelves. It's so if it's something sparkly or they're promising you, I cannot be suspicious of people, especially people who tell you they're 100% of anything. That I referenced this in one of my slides. There is accessibility snake oil out there. And people make promises they simply can't hold up to, especially since there's a lot of fear mongering going on. Also, when accessibility started getting more publicized, suddenly everybody was an accessibility specialist. And I cannot tell you how many from clients that were an automatic review using Axe or Lighthouse, and then they sent the results. And some of those were even false positives. False positives are a thing, and you don't know that without manual testing. I'm getting off track. But
actually, that's so we only have just a couple of minutes with our captioner, and then we got to wrap up. But I think that where you're going with this is maybe a decent like final question. Rohit was wondering if we could talk about how much accessibility testing can be automated versus manual. And like I'll say too on what you're saying about the not 100%, like in our plugin, we have this whole little warning that's like, just because it says 100% pass test, we never say accessible. We had this whole discussion. We're like, we're not going to say that it's accessible. And we've had people reach out and be like, why is it 100% accessible? And I'm like, cause it's not. Right. But I don't know if you want to continue on where you're going and just sort of just in like maybe 2 minutes, talk about like that balance between manual and accessible and how like testing. So if people are trying to test, their WooCommerce site, where is that balance and what can they trust automated and what needs to be manual? Okay, so a lot of stuff. The fact is, if you're involving yourself with accessibility, you or either somebody you trust needs to know what they're doing. Automatic scanners have the capability of false positives. And they don't know some stuff. I will give you an example. If text is on a background image, or a gradient, most automatic scanners can't detect that, and you don't get any of that information. Automatic scanners, I would say, and this is also unfortunate, are the best for markup. They can detect this kind of stuff. It's missing an attribute. It's misusing an attribute. But again, these also have the possibility of being a false positive. Whenever we do audits, we do depend on an automatic scanner. Then we check those results manually. That is a jumping off point for everything else that still needs to be done as a human. So whenever you pull up an automatic scanner, you're going to want to. You could even, here's an idea as you start getting more familiar with that stuff. If you have a question about a result, run it through ChatGPT, unless you're a part of a community, in which case you can also talk to people in the community. But again, take everything with a grain of salt. And if you get involved with an accessibility agency, check credentials, caveat emptor. There are people out there preying on people who want accessibility. But getting back to the automatic scanners, you can do a lot with they are a fantastic resource. My favorite is Axe, but there's also Wave, which will visually show you. Sometimes Wave can be a little bit, as a browser extension, can be a little bit overwhelming for people.
And I encourage, if you're using a shop, to use the browser extension, because if you're using the Wave tool, browser tool, you can't do things like, you can't test for things like add to cart. Carts will always be empty because of the way it functions. But if you download the browser tool, the browser extension, you can actually run it in an active environment where you're adding things to the shop and doing all that stuff. Automatic tools will just tell you information, but it won't always tell you clearly what it means, or what you're supposed to do with it, especially if there is a false positive, which are out there, or if it is unconcludable information like like text on an image or a gradient that they just can't manage. But it's
and the automatic tools are great, and sometimes you'll get a thing and it'll have like 50 issues or whatever, and that's not going to help you. I mean, the other thing you need to start thinking about is to start thinking about the functionality and the prioritization of what you're working on, right? If a person who is not able to see the screen can't get through your checkout process because they can't figure out your form, that's the place to start, right? Or if they can't navigate your menu because it's not keyboard navigable, right? That you've got to start in those big places where there are the walls as opposed to curbs and hurdles, right? So start with your walls and move, ever improving, right? But start with those roadblocks.
It's also great for detecting alt text. That's a great go-to, because it's all about that quick view. That's great. So if you have, say you have a giant page with 1 million images on it, instead of checking in every single one individually, you run the scanner and it points out and highlights which ones are missing alt text, and you know what you need to address. So it's an assistant, but it's not a boss, and it I mean, and so utilizing it can be a great tool, but it can't be 100% dependent on, it can't replace human testing, and it's going to provide you with information that needs somebody who knows what they're doing to look at.
It needs context.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. This has been a phenomenal presentation, and I love the discussion afterwards. It's always really fun to hear from both of you. So thank you so much. And thanks to everyone who stuck around. We'll have a recording and notes with all of the links available in about a week or two. And don't forget to register for WordPress Accessibility Day. If you have not, it is free, and it's coming up at the end of this month. 24 hours of really phenomenal talks from a great audience of speakers or group of speakers from around the world. So thanks, everyone.